LoreWarrior campaign, 4th Succession War, Wapakoneta. The water-rich world of Wapakoneta presented a completely different terrain for the Dragoons of Beta and Delta regiments. Most of this world is covered by deep blue ocean or huge glaciers. The small amount of land is divided among 5 continents and myriads of tiny islands. The 9 companies of Dragoons chose to make their stand on the continent of New Wisconsin, a temperate land, mostly deep forests with many high mountains, lakes, and rivers. For Colonels Shostakovich and Dumont, the terrain suggested a different defensive strategy than on that of Harrow's son. Instead of selecting one base and holding it, the 2 officers decided that New Wisconsin was best suited to a guerrilla style of defense. With this in mind, the Dragoons spent most of their time getting acquainted with the terrain. Every warrior pored over surveillance maps, the Dragoons employing local volunteers as guides. They also hid caches of ammunition and weapons in the forests and in lakes to make themselves self-sufficient. The dropships waited in a parking orbit near Wapakoneta's moon. Most of the planet's militia guarded the continent's 4 major cities to prevent the Combine from using civilians as hostages. The militia also protected the Dragoons' fighters, which used the city's airports. 3 regiments of Wapakoneta cavalry, soldiers who were mounted on horses, not vehicles, were attached to the Dragoons and played a vital role in packing supplies through the mountains and forested terrains. They also played a role in the fighting. Dropships of the 3rd Proserpina Hussars and the 12th Galedon Regulars appeared by the 17th of September. To ensure that they dropped on New Wisconsin and not some other continent where they might commit an atrocity and frustration, the Dragoons broke communication silence and gave the Combine plenty of chatter to listen to and home in on. The Combine forces dropped on the open plains of northern New Wisconsin, and once certain that they were unopposed, the mechs called down their dropships to disembark the rest of the regiments. The dropships landed on the hard, flat ground near the Sorolla River. Like the Combine mech regiments fighting on Harrow's son, the Hussars and 12th Galedon had come to Wapakoneta with very little infantry support. Instead, the regiments unloaded their aerospace fighters and a battalion of combat engineers, who immediately began construction of an airfield for the fighters. The dropships then began to orbit Wapakoneta, ready to lend assistance when needed. This was the cue for the 3rd Provisional Company of Beta Regiment, which had been closely monitoring the enemy's action through a network of remote devices and scouts. This company, led by Captain Van Dusen, was assigned to cripple the Combine fighter capability, no matter the cost. Captain Van Dusen sent 2 of his lancers to assault the Hussars and Galedon Regulars from the west. Taped chatter would then broadcast from their mechs being designed to trick the Combine into believing that more than just lancers were attacking them. General Tarsus Bodoli, commander of the 12th Galedon Regulars, and General Bruce Lee Bernstein, commander of the 3rd Hussars, fell for the ruse and positioned their regiments for a massive attack from the west. Eager to take on the Dragoons, the Combine forces left behind only token guards as they marched to meet the enemy. The Galedon Regulars left only 2 light mechs and several tanks to guard the fighters and the engineers along the Sorolla River. Captain Van Dusen, taking a page from military history, had taken his command lance into the river and was slowly walking east. He hoped that the 2 lancers he'd left behind would fool the enemy long enough for his lance to reach the airfield undetected. Time and again, a mech stumbled, fell, and tumbled about in the swift current, and for 2 hours they struggled downstream. Then the 4 mechs, 2 commandos and 2 wasps, walked out of the river. Captain Van Dusen's navigation had been faulty. The command lance was 10 kilometers east of the airport. Not realizing that his strike and fire lancers had been destroyed by the Hussars and Galedons now, Captain Van Dusen ordered his lance into a trot. With particular relish, the Galedon warriors had spent half an hour torturing the last Dragoon mech, and when its pilot had finally had enough, she ejected, only to be caught in midair by a Combine archer, which threw her into the river, where she drowned. When Captain Van Dusen finally reached the airfield, the Hussars and Galedon Regulars were just returning, flushed with victory. The captain ordered his mechs into a run, but instead of attacking the mechs, he ordered the complete of their mission and destroying as many enemy fighters as possible. They lasted 5 minutes, An eternity, considering the firepower the Combine mechs were levelling against them as they broke clear of the woods. The truly amazing thing was that during those 5 minutes they destroyed or damaged 25 fighters, more than 2/3 of the enemy force. One Dragoon, sensing that his reactor was about to explode, ran and threw himself into a concrete hangar that had just been built. The explosion destroyed 2 fighters and brought the hangar crashing down. Angry now at having lost most of their fighter support, Generals Bernstein and Badoli decided not to wait for the engineers to finish the airfield. They began hunting the rest of the Dragoons immediately. The warriors of the Hussars and Regulars began their march by listening to their commanders give speeches about how they were there to avenge the assassination of warlord Samsonov, their lord and liege, as well as their lost brothers and sisters buried beneath the snow of misery. The generals exhorted them to treat the Dragoons as all mercenary scum, as they should be treated, like cowardly, rabid dogs. The Combine forces marched west for Guerrilla, one of the major cities on the continent, knowing that the Dragoons would try to prevent them from harming innocent civilians. While travelling through the hilly Banff forest, they made contact with the 2nd Provisional Company from Delta Regiment. Using the forest as cover, the Dragoon mechs drew 2 lances of mechs away from the rest of the Combine regiments, and as the Dragoons continued to retreat, demolition teams detonated charges that sent huge trees down upon the road, cutting off the 2 lances of Galedon Regulars. The 2nd Company's efforts to finish off its prey quickly caused a fire. Laser and PPC shots missed a mech but did connect with the trees, creating explosions of splinters and many small fires. The blazes soon combined and grew, and the fight was proving difficult, and the Dragoons were hoping for an easier battle. Though inexperienced, the Regulars had crippled 1 Dragoon and damaged 2 others while losing only 2 of their own mechs. The fire was now growing, and the rest of the Combine mechs were beginning to break through the barrier of trees. Captain Kincaid, commander of the 2nd Company, received the pullback order from his superiors. The captain refused. He'd lost his wife and son on misery and was not about to retreat from a Combine mech. He did order the rest of the company to pull back. 2 of his company stayed with him, and together the 3 took on the 5 Combine mechs in a small hollow of blazing trees. The captain's black box retrieved from his Thunderbolt 3 months after the battle revealed his final minutes as one of rage, fire, and pain. The 2 other mechs destroyed 2 Combine mechs before they succumbed to the superior firepower, and the 3 remaining mechs demanded that Captain Kincaid surrender. His reply was a laser bolt to the head of one of the mechs, and then came a confusion of missile, laser, and fire. Captain Kincaid's final words were for his family. Later, a news team from the Federated Suns following the Combine advance stumbled upon Kincaid's final battlefield. What they found were 6 mechs, stripped by the Combine troops, laying among still smouldering logs. In the middle of the small clearing, ringed by smoking black spires that used to be trees, stood 2 mechs, blackened by fire, with metal and armour blown outward by the explosion of missile ammunition. A Thunderbolt stood motionless, its hands around the head, an unmoving panther, as if to choke it. The eerie sight was apparently so unnerving to the Combine warriors and technicians that they refused to disturb either mech. Instead, someone painted a Buddhist prayer on the legs of the mechs for the souls of the 2 warriors who died so hellish a death. For the next 3 months, the Combine forces searched in vain for the main body of the Dragoons, never realizing that Beta and Delta regiments had long ago split up into company and lance-sized units. These small combat groups repeatedly struck at the long column of Combine forces and quickly retreated into the forests, native guides helping them find shortcuts that allowed them to race ahead of the enemy to wait in ambush once more. These tactics worked very well in forested and mountainous terrain, but the Dragoons lost warriors on the flats, where cover was sparse. Through the use of these age-old tactics, the Dragoons had, by late November, sheared more than 20 mechs from the Proserpina Hussars and the Galedon Regulars. The Dragoons had unintentional assistance from the commanders of the 2 Combine regiments, as General Badoli, by his seniority, assumed command of the Combine effort on Wapakoneta. It was his decision that kept the 2 regiments tied to roads in tightly packed convoys, making it easy for the marauding Dragoons to attack and avoid them. General Bernstein, a younger officer, quickly grew weary of General Badoli's orders, which had his hussars now shooting at phantoms. General Bernstein wanted both regiments to break up into smaller units to hunt down the Dragoons with their own tactics. In late November, the 2 generals' disagreement apparently came to a head, perhaps even to blows, and the Proserpina Hussars left the Galedon Regulars. Any hope that the split would benefit the Dragoons was quickly dashed then when, the November 29th, the 4th Provisional Company of Beta Regiment attempted to ambush a straggling company of Galedon Regulars moving slowly through the hills near Stuyvesant City. Captain Bassara sprang his trap and seemed to have the upper hand when a company of light mechs from the Hussars appeared behind them. Accompanying the Dragoons was a company of Wapakoneta horse-mounted cavalry, which saw the enemy first and attacked. They placed themselves between the Dragoons and the Hussars, helplessly using their laser carbines against the mechs. The Hussars, after a few moments of killing or kicking horses and people aside, moved to capture the Dragoons, and having no choice, Captain Bassara ordered his troops down the slope and into the Galedon Regulars. Only 5 Dragoons survived the melee and escaped. The next week was filled with similar disasters for the Dragoons, who were suddenly harassing less and retreating more. They'd lost 2 of the original 9 companies. Many mechs had only 1 or 2 weapon systems still working by this time. Only the exceptional leadership of their officers and the vital assistance of the civilians kept the Dragoons fighting. Colonels Dumont and Shostakovich knew that the Hussars, in breaking down into smaller units and taking to the woods, had countered the Dragoons' tactics. They knew that the Hussars would eventually divide the Dragoons and destroy each company in turn, unless the colonels could change the direction of the campaign. On the 3rd of January, a company of Hussars found the 5th Provincial Company of Beta Regiment in the forests, just north of Tredald. The light mechs of the Dragoons avoided the Hussars and fled. The Hussars pursued and radioed 2 other Hussar companies, which then joined the hunt. The chase lasted for an hour, during which the Dragoons barely stayed a step ahead of the Hussars, and on separate occasions 3 Dragoon warriors stopped and turned their damaged mechs on the pursuers, giving the main body a few moments and a few kilometers of safety. The 3 companies of Hussars so close to catching the Dragoons were surprised then when the blur of trees gave way to a huge clearing. Though portions of the field looked ploughed and the forests on the other side seemed hot, the Hussars had a clear view of their prey, and pressed on. As the Hussars entered the middle of the field, the Dragoons suddenly turned on them. As the elated Hussars were about to open fire, the remaining mechs of Beta and Delta regiments strode from the trees, 60 mechs staring down 30 Hussars for a moment. A series of explosions broke the brief silence as a minefield, activated by Colonel Dumont, detonated under one of the Hussars, and both sides opened fire, with the Hussars trying to back out of the clearing. When the last Hussar finally reached the trees, the Dragoons ceased fire. Before them were the smoking hulks of 12 Hussar mechs, 2 of which were salvaged for use by the Dragoons. In the battle, which came to be known as the Fight for Ploven's Fields, the Dragoons lost only 3 pilots and 5 mechs. A lull followed, as the Proserpina Hussars rejoined the Galedon Regulars for rest and repair. The reassembled Dragoons now took advantage of the quiet, marching to Hannibal, where the 2 colonels decided to make a stand. As of this writing, the Curetan forces have made no move to dislodge the Dragoons.